You're listening to Till the Bottom. For better or for worse, everything is fascinating if you dig deep enough. If you agree with this, then this podcast might be right for you. Let's start talking. Hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of Till the Bottom. Today, it's just the two hosts together, Nacho and Mitra, and we are going to dig deep this time into something which is quite dear to Nacho's heart. It's something which is which might make a lot of us uncomfortable because we are all kind of doing it to some extent ourselves. It's something which has been coined by a certain anthropologist, Dan Sperber, as the guru effect. And here, guru does not mean the Hindu mystical guru, but specifically guru as in an expert.
Mm-hmm. It's mostly focused about intellectual gurus. For the most part. And
so the idea basically is we just came upon this paper and then titled The Guru Effect by Dan Sperber, where he came up with an interesting idea which we often tend to look over. And we delved deeper into it, looked at some other stuff and decided that this is good enough material to really have a charged up, interesting debate over.
Yeah, definitely. So a little bit of an explanation why I think this is actually a very relevant, other than actually being itself very interesting, because it's a phenomenon that we all fall prey to every now and then. We try, as you will see later, it's something that, in my opinion, we should try to mindfully avoid as much as possible. But I just want to say first, and put this on the table and make it clear that I'm a little, my emotions about this topic, as you said, it's something it's an issue that is very personal to me. Mm-hmm. It's not exactly at the bullseye of my interest. It's near the bullseye of my interest, which in general has to do with how do people extract meaning out of things. And I don't mean meaning in the teleological sense. I mean actually how people do interpret propositions and so on. So I'm like half excited about this topic and also half a bit nervous because I just wanna get it.
You don't want to tread that water.
Yeah, I wanna get it straight. I wanna do this right because it's as I said, it's something that I consider to be very interesting and very important. Mm-hmm. So in order to do that, we agreed that possibly the best strategy would be, if not quite, we're not going to sit down and read the paper for you and just keep on endlessly quoting what Dan Sperber wrote in his paper. But definitely, he streamlined his thought in such a way about this effect that sometimes it's very hard to improve upon his writing. So sometimes I think it's going to be necessary to quote some parts, maybe, and also some examples that he gives about the instantiations of the guru effect. So with that spirit in mind, with that kind of strategy, and because I think there's so much to say about this that we will probably have to race through it a little bit, and we want this episode to be like self-contained and try to avoid the necessity of a second part. So just jump right into it. I think the best way to start is to read the first 3 sentences of the abstract of this paper, because it sets the ground for the incoming conversation. So, are you okay if I do that?
You go for it.
Yeah, I can do it, and then. So the paper starts. The abstract. It says, "Obscurity of expression is considered a flaw. Not so, however, in the speech or writing of intellectual gurus. All too often, what readers do is judge profound what they have failed to grasp." And that's the core of what the guru effect is. That, as he wrote there, very often there's a confusion. We confound at something that is deep, meaningful, with something that is actually unintelligible. I don't know. Have you experienced that?
All the time, yeah. In principle, so the idea here is that we have certain people we look at with a certain sense of authority. Mm-hmm. Everyone does that, right?
Yeah.
To some extent or the other. And of course, you have to consciously always be cognitively listening to actually see if they're always telling the fact of the matter. Mm-hmm. And the whole point is we don't, the human psyche is such that does not allow us to always be cognitively active. Mm-hmm. So when there's a figure of authority who comes and tells us a certain set of things in a profound way, if we are not instinctively able to grasp
it. Can I stop you right there? Because a lot of this discussion is going to lie on in a profound way. You know,
yes.
The way in which things, the way in which things are communicated matters a lot.
Yeah.
Right. That's what makes this effect possible. So when you say in a profound way, more or less what you're saying is,
in vague terms, in this manner, in this moment, it's probably in vague terms. So the whole point here was that when it comes from a figure of authority or someone you attribute certain authority to, if you instinctively don't understand something because it has been said in a profound way, you just take it for granted as fact as a fact or as something that is true, that holds for you, even without having to really go through it in a very rigorous manner.
You kind of let your critical guard down.
Yes.
When something is presented to you, in this case, as you mentioned, by somebody that you have conferred an authority in a certain matter. For instance, an intellectual matter, let's say. It happens a lot in the realm of philosophy, right? Mm-hmm. Many philosophers, this is a broad generalization, but it's not uncommon to find... philosophy is hard to read for a reason, right? It's quite common that you will find utterances or ideas expressed in a very complex way. Yeah. Or as you say, when you say profound, what I understand by that is sophisticated way. Using kind of eloquent language and sophisticated language and highfalutin terms and rhetoric that kind of wraps their concepts or the ideas they want to transmit in a more or less hard to penetrate manner. And what the guru effect is about, for the most part, is that when we as the audience find a proposition hard to penetrate because of how it sounds, the way it is expressed, we tend to regard it almost immediately as profound and deep, and we assume that there's a very interesting idea at the core of whatever is being uttered. Mm-hmm. And how to dispel that? It's like we get charmed by the way things are portrayed sometimes, verbally speaking, or
phonetically sounding good.
Also, in a written format, the same things tend to happen. Good. There's something also that I want to more or less follow the structure of the paper loosely.
Yep.
What Dan Sperber goes into doing right after the abstract is to define two different kinds of beliefs that we hold. One kind he calls them intuitive beliefs, which are beliefs that we subscribe to without ever stating an explicit reason for them. Mm-hmm. Actually, they are mostly beliefs that we hold as true just because of the way we perceive the world. Yeah. For instance, if I believe that glass of beer has beer in it, the only reason why you believe it, it's a very powerful reason. It's just because you perceive it, and perception itself is a cognitive process. Yeah. You don't have to state in any explicit manner the reasons why you believe that's the case.
So because you come from intuition. So for instance, if you see that there's a cloud which comes over the sun, you intuit at that moment that it is probably a bit cooler now to go out.
But that's the other. I think that's the other kind of belief. So, in the intuitive kind of belief is the one that the low-hanging fruit, let's say. It just depends upon direct perception of things. So you see the cloud and you say, it's cloudy. I believe it is cloudy now. Yes. Which is just basically what you're reporting is a perception that you had about the world out there, right? And even the phrasing or to call this a belief is a little bit, I think it can raise some controversy, but okay, this is the way he portrays it. Okay. And the other kind of belief is more or less related to what
interpret something from the other?
It's, he terms them reflexive beliefs. Okay. And those are the beliefs you arrive at by giving a reason. Or sometimes you don't give the reason explicitly, but the beliefs themselves in the way they are stated, or you state them to yourself, implicitly carry a reason for that. So, for instance, I'm going back to the example of the beer, the glass half full of beer. I believe that if I keep on drinking beer, I'm gonna get dizzy.
Yes.
Right? That's because you know some ways about how the world works. In this particular case, how alcohol works.
Yes.
And then your belief is founded upon that knowledge. You have a reason to validate that belief. Yeah. Even though you're not going in a normal conversation. You're not going to have to justify that belief.
Yeah. No. So it could be something very spontaneous, it may feel instinctive, but this is something which took 2 steps instead of 1 to come up with.
I think the crucial difference is that this second kind, the reflexive kind of belief, implies a reason.
Yeah.
Whether it's stated explicitly or implicitly in the structure of the belief, it doesn't really matter. But there's a reasoning that leads you from proposition A to conclusion B. Yeah, so that's different than just perceiving. But both are cognitive processes. Perception is a cognitive process, and this kind of reasoning, deductive reasoning, is also a cognitive process.
Right? So this is reflexive and intuitive. I'm still trying to understand this. Intuitive means like if I feel warm, I am stating that.
I believe it's hot. I believe the weather is warm. I believe something that you don't need to give yourself a reason for you to ascertain that belief, but it's basically a direct perception of your surroundings, and then you hold the belief because of a stimuli that you're directly feeling is directly impinging upon yourself. Yeah. So those are the two cases. And afterwards, he talks a little bit about confirmation bias. I don't know, are you familiar with the term?
Yeah. In principle, that is a much maligned term at the moment, right?
Yeah.
Because we live in echo chambers. With social media coming in, we are listening and reading to only the kind of stuff which fits in our worldview. And which would mean that this is a fact or a story which is told from your color. And that's why it is confirming the bias you already have. And that is exactly what it means, confirmation bias.
Yeah, in a nutshell, confirmation bias is all about giving more credence to beliefs or propositions that you learn based on what you already believe, right? So you already have, let's say, a worldview that is composed upon a complicated web of beliefs, and whenever you stumble upon a proposition that fits very nicely within that worldview already, you will pay that more attention. And you will kind of close your ears and close your eyes to anything that would be contrary to that pre-established set of beliefs that you already hold. And that's important in the context of the guru effect, because I think a way to shoot this concept of confirmation bias into the dynamic of the guru effect is, again, coming back to the issue of beliefs that you hold because of authority, right? So if you already have conferred somebody the trust of just, I don't want to say following blindly the utterances of this person, but you hold this person in such an esteem for whatever reason that whatever proposition that person makes, you will tend to take it as a proposition of truth, then anything that follows, any following proposition that person can make because of your confirmation bias, you will tend to see it also positively and to interpret it charitably. So,
and here it's also important to clarify that we are not talking about a person as in like it doesn't have to be someone you give credit to. It can be institutions as well. It can be institutions like science as well.
Yeah, sure.
So we are all participating or subjugated or somehow enchained by some form of confirmation bias. Like for instance, I don't know, you know about Thomas Kuhn? Yeah. He talks about basically the theory of scientific revolutions, where he talks about that even scientists, and right now this basically his ideas gain a lot of traction in social sciences because they keep changing from one set of concepts to another set of concepts. But he was in essence talking about natural sciences, where we work within a worldview,
a paradigm. He calls
it a paradigm. And then you basically try whatever experiments you're doing, whatever results you're getting, you tend to fit it into that current model.
Yeah, and the key point that connects that possibly to this issue is the point of interpretation.
Yes.
Right? So you stumble upon something. In this in the case of science, it's an experiment, a phenomenon that you measure in the lab.
Yeah.
And then what we do essentially every day in our work is how do you interpret the results? How do you read out the experiment? And then you have to use usually what people do, when you do, I think he calls it normal science. I don't remember exactly.
Yeah, he calls it normal science.
Normal science is that
what we are doing in principle, most of the scientists are doing normal science,
which is
where they're filling in the blanks in a currently conceived paradigm. There's only a few people at the edges when there is too many non-intuitive things happening.
Sure. How does he call that? It's not disruptive science. I don't remember the term, but yeah.
But this was just a side note that when we are talking about confirmation bias, we are not talking about just the regular layman. We're talking about everybody. We are all prey to it in some way or the other.
Yeah, I want to connect that what you said with the issue of interpretation because it's very, very important. It's very central to this. So again, just to rewind a little bit. So let's say you're doing your research and then you prepare an experiment. The experiment runs. You have some results, and now it's time to sit down and understand what the hell happened in that experiment.
Most of the time it will fit your story, but there are every so often it doesn't fit your story.
That's where interpretation creeps in. Again, I mean, I also don't want to give the impression that interpretation in science is infinitely flexible, just as in everyday conversation, right? Usually it runs, the interpretive space has some more or less clear defined boundaries. But essentially what you do is you have a theory that is more or less well established, or a set of theories, and then you will try to piece everything together. You will try to graph, this aspect of this theory explains this part of my experiment, and this other aspect of that other theory explain this other part of my experiment, and you make like a more or less coherent picture. But interpretation is the key part there. When he talks about paradigm shift is when kind of the options for interpretation, you run out of options for interpretation because there are simply too many contradictory results that keep on piling up and up and up and up until there's a point in which the theories kind of have to not break down, but at least be sometimes they break down.
And at some point, of course, these interpretations get more and more creative. Actually, just coming out of science, a wonderful example of how creative interpretations can get is just typing on Google on all the different theories the flat earth believers come up with. Like, that's some beautiful
sometimes
level and extent of interpretation, right?
Yeah, I mean,
just to fit in with your confirmation bias, the kind of beautiful concepts you can come up with.
It's amazing. Okay, so interpretation.
Yeah.
Let's extract that out of this part of the conversation. Why is interpretation possible at all when you're talking about the guru effect, the context of the guru effect, or the context of understanding, of communication? An interpretation is possible at all because a lot of things that you say when you communicate an idea are ambiguous by nature. The fact that I will possibly grab an example now from the paper, because I think it's very telling. Oh, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to clarify this with an idea. For instance, the word doping.
Yeah.
It has different meanings, right? If I talk to you about semiconductors, let's say, and I say this semiconductor is doped, you, because you're a scientist, you will immediately rule out the other possible interpretations of doping, right? You're not going to say, oh, so what
the
drug
line
you
gets
put
a bit vague when you're a junkie scientist.
Yeah, possibly. Or so that's what the context informs you or makes you choose which interpretation is the correct one. If you're talking about sports, then doping doesn't mean that you will introduce impurities. Well, in a way, or they will introduce impurities.
I think the roots are pretty similar, right? Like doping is like throwing in.
You can even go further and talk about the world of hip hop, and when they say it's dope, which means like it's cool, and it's a completely different. The point is that the context will help you choose between possible interpretations, and this is important in the context of the guru effect, because some interpretations are more charitable than others, let's say. Now, going back to the issue of authority. When, let's say, you have a figure that you admire very much, and that figure is trying to communicate a complicated idea to you. Because you already trust that figure, you will tend to use to give the more charitable possible interpretation to the statement of that person, right? Which in this context means you will assume that there's a deep idea that the person is trying to communicate, and if the person is crafting that idea in complicated terms, it's because either there's just no option there's no another possibility to express that idea because it's so complicated in itself, or it's just that person is just particularly smart, and it doesn't matter really if I cannot get it. Actually, the fact that the utterance or the proposition is mysterious can be used as a tool or as a justification to adjudicate even more depth to the utterance of that person. And I think it's a very good example of the guru effect just playing itself out there. That tends to happen all the time.
So the language it somehow fails us somehow in a lot of cases. So something like mathematics as a language, there you have less room for a guru effect.
I mean, if you're familiar, right, with mathematics.
So in principle, you are arguing that the room for interpretation is based on the inconsistencies with the communication.
There are many factors. Again, one of them is context, right? Context will make you choose between possible interpretations. And actually, there's another paper that I was reading recently. It's like I think the leading author is a guy called Stephen Piantadosi. He works at MIT, and he and his colleagues put forward the idea that ambiguity it's an important element to make a language efficient, to make a communicative channel efficient. You can think about this in various ways, and I'm going to connect this to the issue of context in a minute, and interpretation. So there's another linguist, older. I think his family name is Zipf. I don't know where he's from, but the point is, he says that in a language, or when you engage in communication, you have a listener and you have a speaker, right? Now, the speaker is going to try to minimize effort by being as ambiguous as possible, because that saves him effort. And he gives the extreme case. Imagine that there's only one, for the speaker, everything runs very smoothly if there's only one word for everything.
Yeah.
If I say ba, actually it's not even a word, it's just like a phoneme, you know? Yeah. If I say ba, every time I want to express an idea, then I am minimizing my effort as a speaker.
Yeah.
But I'm maximizing ambiguity.
Yeah.
Now, for the listener, the opposite case is what it's like a conflict, and he's pushing for the opposite scenario, where, because if he wants to understand what the speaker is saying, then it's better for the listener that the speaker he minimizes his ambiguity as much as possible. So for that, the speaker would need to utter his ideas in a very specific manner with as many words as possible, as many words as it takes for the idea to be unambiguous.
Yes.
Yeah, so that the listener can get it. So there's like a balance. Anyway, this idea has been discredited, but it more or less, as far as I know, there's a lot of debate. You know, it's linguistics, probably it's hard. Yeah. I shouldn't say that it's been discredited, but there's a lot of debate and there's a lot of counter arguments and so on and so on and so on. But you get the gist.
In terms of communicating an idea,
you get the gist. The gist is that there's an optimum level of ambiguity that will maximize the efficiency of a language, right? And it's a commitment between the needs of the speaker and the needs of the listener. Now, this Piantadosi guy, what he says is that ambiguity is very useful because when you're talking to anybody, when you're communicating an idea, it's always within a certain context.
Yeah.
And that context kind of disambiguates what's ambiguous. Again, the example of doping. If we're talking about solid state physics, and I use the word doping, you're not going to entertain any other big significance or any other meaning, of the word doping, because the context will tell you, he means, that he's introducing impurity or elemental impurities into a solid body. So that's the idea of ambiguity, minimizing interpretation. Now, the curious thing is that in the case of the guru effect, things kind of run the other way.
Yes, but can we discuss something in between? So I also think about scientific writing, where we are very, very precisely asked, can we, so...
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, go on.
Little technical problems, somebody trying to enter the room. Now we'll get back to the topic.
So in scientific writing, we are basically trained to just stick to the facts. There's no artistic liberty. There's no, you try to reduce as much ambiguity as you can. And so that makes it a much more duller, drier thing to read. Right? And that's a big difference between reading a paper and reading popular science, for instance. Popular science has to be a bit more lyrical. Sometimes to resonate an idea in the mind of the audience, you have to use wordings, you have to use analogies that will stick with the audience much longer. But as soon as you do that, there is some room for ambiguity. But on the other hand, there is also a greater likelihood of that person getting deeper into it than if the uninitiated, if they start reading journal papers.
There's a sacrifice there.
Exactly. And that is where the trouble starts happening. Because you're going to the other level, but there is a reason why everything is not written down crisply and precisely, concisely. Because that's not going to last with the audience.
The context is what defines everything there. So if you want to disseminate knowledge, let's say you're writing a popular science book, there's a trade-off between precision and ambiguity. And in this case, you will have to lean a little bit more towards the ambiguity that is inherent to the vernacular
Yes.
language, colloquial language. Because what you want to do is to communicate an idea that is oftentimes very complex to the maximum amount of audience that you can possibly reach. And if you do that, you know, in science, when you write a paper, as you were saying, you try to minimize the ambiguity, right? Yeah. Actually, you absolutely go for the economy of words, sometimes to an extreme degree, at least in the natural sciences.
You really curtail, and you sometimes even have to lose out on some of the meaning.
It's hard. It's hard to strike the balance. I remember when I wrote my first paper, how I got pummeled by my boss, and he basically had to sit me down and tell me, "You're not writing a novel." I mean, he literally said that. You're not writing a novel. You need to get used to this style of writing. And it's actually harder than it sounds. You know?
Yeah, it totally is.
Anyway.
Yeah. Sorry to get you off the loop.
No. I'm not really off. I wanna say something.
Yeah.
I wanna read something from the paper, because that's going to take us to another point that I think it's very interesting, and it's. Let me just find it. Yeah, here. So there's another effect. When you there's another phenomenon. Sorry, not quite an effect. Let's say you want to communicate the idea X. You have two ways to do it. You have many ways to do it. There have many ways to phrase the idea. You can go straight to the point.
Yeah.
And you can beat around the bush and embellish your prose and your language and so on.
Yeah.
Even though both, let's say, formulations communicate the same idea, essentially, they will be perceived differently by the listener. So he gives an example here that I want to read out. He says that he takes an example from Paul Grice. And he says, he asks us to compare the remarks. Remark A. Miss X sang Home Sweet Home. No? So there's some lady that sang Home Sweet Home. And the other way to say it, the way B, the alternative B. Miss X produced a series of sounds that corresponded closely with the score of Home Sweet Home. Yeah. Now, what's the effect that has on you as a listener? What he argues is that the first one is just a statement, no? There's Miss X that sang a song. The song is called Home Sweet Home, period. Yeah. That's it. You don't overinterpret. You don't spend any other energy or time trying to come up with what could that possibly mean? Try to tell me something else or anything like that. That doesn't happen. In the second way of saying it, just because of the way it's structured, the way it's overworked, that opens room for other more richer interpretations.
And the way we read literature and pop culture at the moment, the second sentence to me sounds like it's a horrific manner in which he sang.
Yeah, it sounds like sarcasm.
Yeah.
You know, sarcasm, which is a way of speaking where you actually introduce ambiguity purposefully as much as
that possible. Level of sarcasm is something that is running in our veins as well.
Yeah.
All the time. Yeah.
But here's the thing. The key point, the key idea from this example is that the way you couch, the way you phrase, just by the choice of words, will imply or will multiply the possible interpretations and make them richer just by that, even if the idea remains the same, right? So there are different ways of couching ideas. And that leads us to, I think, the most representative examples where the guru effect is in full display. Yeah. And you can grab examples from many areas.
Just to clarify the point, are you prescribing to one way of telling a story over the other? Or you're saying this is what exists?
This is what happens. I'm not saying, no, there's no, I'm not trying to prescribe anything or be normative or anything. This is just what happens. This is just a curious thing about our cognition. Yeah. Yeah, it's just that. Yeah. And this is going to be very relevant just in a moment. But before getting into there's another example that he regarding the role of authority in what we take to be truth. And this starts since we are kids. Actually, when we are kids, we take basically everything just because adults represent an authority, and we just assume them to be more. We are predisposed somehow, cognitively speaking, to take their words for truth. And he gives two very good examples. He talks about a fictional girl called Lucy, and he says Lucy was told when she was a kid. I mean, I'm paraphrasing here. That cucumbers are made of 95% of water. Yeah. Now, if Lucy is 7 years old, does that really make sense to her? In which sense does that make sense to her?
You imagine like a balloon, and there's like 95%.
But she knows cucumbers, right? Yeah. I mean, water is a liquid, right? And a cucumber is a solid. And there's no, when you break a cucumber, it's not like water starts flowing out, and it's like, okay, yeah, that makes sense to me. So she just takes it on the face of authority, and eventually she will learn the reasons why, which are pretty much scientific reasons, let's say, why that statement is true. Now, on the other hand, Lucy also got told when she was a kid that God is everywhere. And does that make sense to her? Now, not really. There's just no way she can conceptualize that. But the source is very similar. Both are adults,
but in both cases, you visualize something. You make a visualization.
That's a great point. Yeah. No, go on. You want to say something more about it?
No, you basically visualize something as soon as it is, and the concept gets clearer and clearer, or murkier and murkier, depending on which direction.
But you never get there, right? In the second case, in the case of cucumbers are made of 95% of water, you're gonna get there.
Yeah, but a lot of people get there with the second statement as well.
But not quite. Almost, theologians keep on making formulations and interpretative schemes that will give sense to this kind of statement, but it's never as satisfying as the explanation of why cucumbers are 95% water.
You, right?
I think
most people are more than not most people. The people who prescribe to that God is everywhere in everything, a lot of them are very satisfied with it.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that it is explained the same way. But that's a good point. That's a good point. Actually, that's kind of the point that there are some utterances that are mysterious and that you in the beginning accept at face value because of the authority of whoever passed that idea down onto you. Yeah. And then the mystery in those utterances is just taken as a kind of token for profundity and depth. So more or less that's what you say. But just quickly, just to go back to something that you said there that I think it's actually very interesting, is that you try to make sense out of it. No matter what. Actually, you always... Do you want to say something?
No, I'm just thinking that if that is something everyone is exercising. Like the fact that... I don't know if everyone tries to make sense and visualize it. A lot of people just don't go in that territory.
I think you inevitably do that. I think it's a reflex.
So when you try to probe someone, like someone is really wrong with a certain ideology. When you try to probe them further and further, a lot of people will say, we don't want to think about it. It's just too much of a cognitive act trying to go in that direction to think. So they have kind of pulled on the curtains, and on the curtains it's written that the fact that is there. They don't want to open the curtain and go deeper into it.
It takes a lot of cognitive effort.
Sometimes, and I'm not talking just about religion. I'm talking about, like for me, theoretical physics.
Yeah, sure.
Sometimes I just take it for granted. Like I am dealing a lot with theoretical biophysicists, and some of the papers I have to really, really dig deep in a certain direction, which is extremely time consuming and mentally very energy consuming. So instead I just see, okay, this is a well cited paper, this is from a very reputed lab, and this in essence is the idea they're coming out with at the end. So I just take it.
Yeah, this is not a demolishing critique on authority, because at some point, no matter what you do, you have to rely on something that somebody had said before, some formulation that somebody had come up with.
But this doesn't have to be with respect to science, for instance. It also works with me.
But it does.
To some extent, it would work with me. Let's try to think of someone. Christopher Hitchens, not always, but some of his text is extremely dense for me. And then in a concise point, if there's like, say there's a book he has written, and then he gives a popular lecture describing the essence of the book, I just buy the idea of the book from that lecture.
Yeah,
and then I never get the time or the cognitive energy to really dig deep into the book.
That's a good. That takes us. I mean, now you open several paths, several doors that we can pursue, and I'm a little bit hesitant to which one I want to go first, but probably that the last one. The last one, I'm gonna pick on that one and connect it to the paper.
Yeah.
So sure. So what you're saying, or what I gather is. I don't want to say. So what you're saying is, it just reminds me of a certain interview with a certain Canadian psychologist and a certain host in the 4 News channel, 4chan. I don't remember the name of the channel. Kathy Newman and Jordan Peterson.
Okay.
Do you remember? No, when she kept saying, "Well, so what you're saying is anyway." Absolute tangent, but So what you're saying is is that. There are ideas that are complex, sure, and then you can. How do you go about that? About communicating those ideas? If the idea is very complex, sometimes you have no option but to use complex language to explain it and complex concepts to explain it. It happens all the time in science. You know, take something very difficult to understand. Possibly ungraspable, actually unthinkable, in most literal sense, that you cannot actually, form a mental image of this particular phenomenon. Black hole entropy. This is as complex as it can get in science. The concept of black hole entropy is very difficult to understand. Actually, the only way in which you can start to understand is you need to have a
proper mathematical
catalog.
foundation.
Not only forget that, you have to have a catalog of other also difficult concepts that, when you assemble them together in the right way, will explain to you the concept of black hole entropy. You need to know what a black hole is, how they are originated, what the event of horizons is. You need to have concept about actually information. The relationship between information and entropy is also playing a role there. I mean, I'm not an expert about this, but I more or less have an idea, like how to walk my way to get to that concept. The point is that what I'm trying to say is that the concept is so hard in itself that there's no... if you want to explain it in plain terms, layman terms, you need a book.
Or you need to find suitable analogies, and that is what a lot of people end up doing.
Which will take you pages and pages, right? For you to communicate that idea. So sometimes there's no option. And when you talk about Christopher Hitchens and how difficult it is, yes, in this particular case, it's not always that his ideas are so difficult, so complex.
I think it's also a style which matters, right? For instance, Steven Pinker, also another one guy you like. He has a very dry style of writing his stuff.
But that's because of a different reason. So that's because in the case of Christopher Hitchens, he had his style. He was very florid with his language.
What I'm saying is, if for instance he was at least to us, I think he comes from some form of honest understanding of the world, but he could very well be coming from a very dishonest place.
Good. It could, and probably you would not be able to tell the difference because of how complex.
I cannot do that with literature, for instance. What is sometimes I struggle, like Murakami, for instance.
I've never read this guy.
But
I read Salman Rushdie.
I recently read 2 books from Murakami, which are supposed to be really, really good. They're decent. But I personally
That's very
don't,
politically correct.
Yeah, but I don't appreciate why they are masterpieces. Like I just don't get it. But there is such an overwhelming majority of people who say it's masterpieces. So there must be something where I don't have a clarity about.
But that's exactly the guru effect thing working on you at that moment.
Yeah,
you know?
but there it's
possible that
effect,
it doesn't.
But in some other cases it isn't. Like it's very hard to say. It could very well be that at some places I can just leave it at that.
Okay. Let's bring it back to the paper. But that's a very good. I mean,
I know. I wanted to get in.
It's
that
a great
direction.
example. Yeah. You know. So again, just to recapitulate very quickly. So sometimes the idea is very complex, and you need a complex way to explain that idea, you know, or the thought.
Yeah.
But sometimes there are some ways of expressing an idea that seem almost intentionally obscure. And now this is my input, because when he talks about those cases, he explains that he is more concerned not about dishonest gurus that want to just scam people by seeming profound, but he's talking about honest gurus that probably don't find any other way to express their complex idea, but still the way they express it, there's no context in which that the way they express the idea is simple and can be understood easily. And he gives some examples that I think are remarkable, and I really want to read one of them.
Sure.
So he says, let me just go to the previous page, if I find it now, and it's this mess of pages that I have here. Anyway, I don't find it, but the point is that there are some, again, as I said, there are some thoughts or some ways of writing that no matter which context you want to apply to those ways of expressing yourself, they are not simple. Mm-hmm. It's not easy to extract the meaning out of them. And he gives the example of several, philosophers. He particularly focused on French Derrida, continental philosophers, and he also, makes the point that he tells the reader that he grew up more in Paris, and he was very familiar with these people, and that was kind of the intellectual environment of his age. And he gives several quotes. The first one. This one is from Jean-Paul Sartre. Consciousness is a being, the nature of which is to be conscious of the nothingness of its being. It's short, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But there's no way in which this sentence is easy to understand. There's no context in which the meaning comes readily to you and say, yeah, sure, it's easy to grasp. Yeah. And there's this other one, which is, this is the archetypal situation or communicative style of a guru, intellectual guru, I would say. Again, he didn't use these words. These are my words. This is Derrida writing. If difference is, and the is crossed out actually. If difference is, parenthesis, and I also crossed out the is, what makes possible the presentation of the being present, it is never presented as such. It is never offered to the present or to anyone, reserving itself, not exposing itself. In regular fashion, it exceeds the order of truth at a certain precise point, but without dissimulating itself as something, as a mysterious being, in the occult of a non-knowledge, or in a whole with indeterminable borders, parenthesis, for example, in a topology of castration. Now, I'm going to put this down. I want us to digest that. So, sorry for the interruption. There was a little break there because somebody entered to clean the room, pass in front of the camera. And but you didn't... We managed to edit this.
But it gives people some time to digest the sentence you just made.
Actually, it couldn't have happened at a better moment.
Yeah.
So now, please digest what I just read, and I want to try to compel you, or to, accept that the situation is such that however complex the thought is that Derrida had in mind when he wrote that, I find it very hard to believe that there was no simpler way to write it down, right? Again, Sperber says that he's focusing on honest gurus, and he actually makes afterwards the clarification. He says, the point I am trying to illustrate is independent of the quality and clarity of what the authors had in mind when writing these passages. Maybe each and every one of them had in mind an important thought that could not be expressed in any simpler way. Yeah. So that's a possibility, but I think he's just being nice. I really personally can't...
I don't know. So this brings me to the murky territory that I find myself in a lot of cases. Like if I read a sentence like that, I'm probably going to, if I am in the mood for it, trying to really try and understand, I will read it thrice, then give up, and then move on to the next point. Because, of course, for me, it's very hard to comprehend what exactly he's saying. And this is not just this specific sentence. I'm talking about in terms of all, because coming from India, we have a lot of different philosophies. And people come up with very nuanced and very harmonious sounding ways of putting things together, which sounds very it sounds very comfortable, and it's very pleasing to the ears. But at the end of the day, people are never communicating a specific point. Everything is like up in it's like clouds.
Because of the way it is expressed.
Yeah, it's like clouds, you feel like there's some solid object, but when you're inside clouds, you realize there's nothing in there. So you really don't grasp it.
When you say there's nothing in it, is that there's no real core meaning in it, right? It's whatever you look at, what you feel you have penetrated through the way this concept was expressed. Yeah. When you think you made it through the words, and you think now I kind of digest it and I get it now, I can conceptualize it to some degree, you find that either there's no real meaning or
I'm intellectually challenged.
That's one possibility. Or you're disappointed.
Which is something I've considered a tremendous amount of times, that I am just not seeing something beyond.
I mean, to have doubts it's always fine, but sometimes what the guru effect is also trying to tell us is that to not let yourself be easily fooled by this. And she actually says, at some point, the fact that these ideas were couched in this very complicated sophistry style of talking or writing is not an argument, it's not a proof against the meaningfulness of the content of the idea, but it should never be taken as a token for their depth.
Yeah.
It should never be, there should not be an equivalence, there should not be like a direct proportionality relationship, let's say, between how difficult it is to understand something because the way it is expressed and how intelligent and deep it is. But that illusion always plays out in our minds. You can't help it, And then he talks about the authority runaway effect.
Yeah.
That if you already have conferred a lot of authority in some intellectual guru, let's say, it can also be a religious guru of any kind of guru, then you will always be charitable on your interpretation of whatever that person says. And actually, so this person will tend to say something in their particularly mysterious way.
This honestly happens so unconsciously, subconsciously sometimes, that you're not even noticing it. You think that you're coming from first principles. So
just to finish the feedback loop here, is that you have somebody that you have already conferred a lot of authority in a particular topic, and that person tends to express him or herself in a very complicated way. Yeah. But you will take that complicated, that extra, or let's say that complicated manner of communication as signifying the depth and the intelligence on the ideas that person is trying to communicate.
Yeah.
And because you do that, you will always be granting. You know, this is like a feedback loop dynamic. Whatever comes next, whatever deeper or more complicated idea that person is going to follow up, you will keep on granting more and more authority and more significance, and so you basically guru-ize somebody.
Yeah.
You know, and then there's nothing really positive that can come out of that.
Yeah.
So that's I think, more or less. I mean, there's a lot of more stuff in the paper and that you can talk about, but
it's
that's more or
very
less
short paper.
Yeah, that's like 10 pages,
Yeah.
but it's really, you know, if you look at the pages, it's basically all of it is highlighted. I think it's a very good read. I think we should link to it in the description.
Can I just take a slight tangent?
Yeah, sure.
So when you say profound, it doesn't have to be the language used, right? Like, for instance, what do you think about Malcolm Gladwell, for instance? He talks in anecdotes and synthesizes a point which he comes up with a general statement. And I'm not saying that he does a really good job of telling a story, for sure. And he tries to synthesize points out of it. And I'm not deriding him. But what I'm saying is, that's a style often used by gurus, where it's not the language, but they give some sort of an anecdotal story, and then they synthesize a point out of it, which is like an all-encompassing thing which you take, and sometimes they don't even come up with a message. Sometimes he just leaves it to you. He just a lot of gurus do that, and I'm talking about religious gurus, which I think of, like the cults, a few cults that I've seen in India. When you ask them a question, they just smile, and then they tell a completely non-contextual story, and leaves it at that. And now,
the mystery, because again, there's a point of mystery.
No, and the point is, and this is what mystics do, right? Like when they're looking at these fortune tellers, they do something similar, right? They keep so they bring the ambiguity not with the language, but with the style in which the idea has been answered to. So it doesn't have to be the language.
Yeah. I see what you mean. The style.
Yeah.
But that's very good. That's only after they already reach the status of a guru. Before they cannot easily get away with that.
But
I think that gets maximized.
Yeah.
As
the impact gets maximized
as they gather more.
But there are people who have styles of doing it, and I think if you do an exercise on writing poetry or very lyrical prose, you're doing that in principle. Even movies. There's a lot of movies which I will go like, wow.
Oh, movies, yeah. I think.
Like there are some movies, and then everyone else is like, that was absolute piece of crap. And I say, no, there is some serious amount, there's a beautiful synthesis of human emotions or something, and something that resonated. But everyone a lot of people are trying to make that attempt, trying to get the point across by saying something in a different context.
I see. I can completely understand what you mean. I'm going to try to land it a little bit, a little bit more. But I see what you're saying. So you're saying that but again, this is a style, I think, that becomes profitable in terms of gathering more, admiration, only after you already have as a good quell of admiration. When I think that's more or less, the type of communication that you're talking about, or the style of, I don't know how to call it, this communicative style that you're talking about is like, a master guru, what is the meaning of life? And then the guru replies some completely disconnected anecdote about his or childhood, let's say, and how it was a rainy day, and he saw some birds flying into the horizon, and then it was a sunset, or some complete, and then ends there in some sort of suspense. Exactly. And then this is a consummated guru, because now what the followers will do, given the authority of a guru, the reputation of a guru that this person already has,
they're
going to act a whole debate, a whole hermeneutic interpretative exercise is going to open up about all the outcome of this exercise has already a well-defined goal, which is no matter what we do, we're gonna make sense out of that. That's because
this just reminded me of a very, very beautiful example. Like musicians, when they write music, if they are popular musicians, there is like there are websites which is just trying to derive any kind of meaning what they might be thinking and this and that. And with Beatles, for instance, they were like, what the fuck? They are taking our songs and just making so many different interpretations. Oh, this time this guy was high or something like that. And then they wrote, I am a walrus. And they said, just go knock yourself out. They write the most incomprehensibly detached set of sentences and said, make meaning out of it.
But that's
or what Lewis Carroll does. That's another amazing literary character, I would say, who just writes. It just comes from pure randomness, right? And then there are people who sometimes just derive these meanings out of it, and then it's all very profound. For some people, sometimes it becomes really profound as well.
Because you have already guruized somebody.
Yeah.
So that now at that point, it just doesn't matter. You cannot go wrong. Yeah. You can simply go wrong. You know, everything you say, your followers are going to find a way to make it.
That's an exercise that is extremely strongly imbibed in our culture. And I'm not talking about just religion. Like, during my bachelor's, the English literature students that I communicated with, in principle, they would read a lot of famous books, like from different genres and everything. And then as a assignment, they will always have to write a synthesis, a critique of it, right? And there's always this interpretation and that interpretation. There's already assumed that there is a different layers, different frameworks. And I do not think that some of these authors really thought it through. It's like someone trying to psychoanalyze what the author was trying to interpret, and then coming up with some ridiculous arguments. And the more ridiculous it is, if it hits the nail with the professor who is reading it, and you get a home run then, right?
Yeah. But those are the advanced.
And so this is something that is kind of promoted, like looked upon.
Absolutely.
In our society, and I don't have a problem with it because I also enjoy doing it.
No, I don't.
Yeah.
But those are the advanced stages of the guru dynamic, you know? Yeah. When this process, when you engage already in this runaway authority meaning looping cycle, you reach those stages, you know? And now I want to read something from I read an article in an online magazine called Arrow magazine. It's actually, I like it. I think that their articles are very thoughtful, very nuanced, very well thought through, and I think it's a good magazine. So there's an article written by James A. Lindsay, and the title of the article is going to expose the connection that because I want to finish. I want to end this in something that you call my personal vendetta, but I'm going to insist that it's not the case.
Your personal vendetta.
It's not. I'm gonna explain why. But okay. Yeah. But in this article, he cites Martha Nussbaum, and she's writing about another author called Judith Butler, which, if I am correct, I think she's a feminist author. I don't remember the name of her most popular works, but I think that's the case. And she considers her to be a guru, and then she explains kind of the essence of the guru mechanics. And this is what she writes: when ideas are stated clearly, after all, they might be detached from their author. One can take them away and pursue them on their own. When they remain mysterious. Indeed, when they are not quite asserted, one remains dependent on the originating authority. The thinker is heeded only for his or her turgid charisma. One hangs in suspense, eager for the next move. And then she talks about Butler in particular. But the point is this: when ideas are stated clearly, this is, I think, the central point to take home from this extract. They can be detached from their author. You can pursue them on their own. They have some certain logic to them. You know, the say fractionary ideas that compose the big idea have a thread of logic that will kind of you will have a sense of inevitability. You know, start from premise A, what follows should be premise B, and the bridge that connects them feels like, yeah, that makes sense. It's in some way inevitable, you know, and then blah 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 until you reach the conclusion, right? That's what happens when ideas are stated clearly. It doesn't matter who said them or the way they said them. You can extract them and analyze them and pursue them on your own. But in the case of gurus, that's not the case. They have their own, and this author actually calls this island epistemologists. They have their own way of pursuing truth, of starting from premise A and reaching conclusion C, that only they can spell out for you, you know, because there's no the thread of logic that takes you from A to C. It's just not clear at all. That's why you hang on to their every word, so they can guide you through their thought process. And now it's time for me to reveal my... You call it personal vendetta, but I disagree with that description. Because, full disclosure, I'm gonna...
Trash Jordan Peterson.
No, I'm not gonna trash Jordan Peterson. Okay, before doing this... I want to clarify some things that I think about the guy. So Jordan Peterson, Canadian psychologist, became very famous because of some YouTube videos that he posted against Bill C-16, which has to do with some Canadian legislation on gender pronouns, blah blah blah. Then he wrote a book that I have right here, 12 rules, called 12 Rules for Life: An Antidote to Chaos, which became Amazon bestseller immediately, and it stood there in the top in the number 1 position for a couple of months. I don't know actually now where it stands with respect to that ranking, but it should be somewhere there. It sold a lot of copies. Yeah. Now I don't have anything personal against Jordan Peterson. Actually, I think he can speak very clearly about certain things. You know, when he sticks to psychology or even the self-help stuff that he does, and I think he can be very, very much straight to the point, very clear. He's definitely eloquent. He's absolutely smart. He has a enviable vocabulary for sure, and his rhetoric abilities are also admirable. He's very theatrical and very effective in conveying messages. And it turns out that he actually has helped a lot of people. You know, people after reading this book that somehow felt, you know, kind of left out. So so it helps. So in a pragmatic sense, I commend what he's doing. I think it's fine. You know, but there are some rather common instances in his writing and his thinking and his talking in which he essentially follows by the line the guru mechanic. I have no other way of saying this. So I read this. I haven't finished. I still have like 60 pages left or something for the book, and I encounter this mechanic all the time. So what I'm gonna do now, I'm sorry if I just
no go for it. You're taking too much time trying to build up the tension.
So what I'm gonna do now is try to explain. So this book is structured in the following way. So it's called 12 Rules for Life, and there are 12 rules actually that he's giving us advice, you know, for people to follow. And each book, each chapter is very much self-contained. Now the issue is that he has an attachment, very evident. Actually, he doesn't hide it. An attachment to
Judeo-Christian
as often as possible, try to ground his reasoning in the Judeo-Christian tradition, and particularly in the biblical text.
Yes.
So he sets up always, and what I'm going to do is representative of the book. I'm not kidding. You find this way of operating all throughout. In some chapters more than others, but there are some chapters that are entirely dedicated to find the answer to that question through interpretations of the biblical text from beginning to end. And I cannot do this without a map. His first book was called actually Maps of Meaning. I think it's very apt for what he does, because I had to make a map. I'm gonna try to explain to you what the chapter number 2 is about.
Go for it.
Which is called Treat Yourself Like Someone You Are Responsible for Helping.
Yeah.
And here's where the guru part comes in, because I had to do the map, because there was no way for me to start from his initial question and premises and reach to his conclusion through I couldn't pursue the idea on my own in the terms of Martha Nussbaum. I had to follow his writing. There's no other way to get it.
Yeah.
So he starts with this chapter with a question. There's a question to answer. And the question is, why are people more likely to comply with the therapeutical advice for their dogs or their pets than to themselves? Meaning, for instance, why people don't take their meds when they get diagnosed with a disease, but if their pets get diagnosed with a disease, they are much more likely to medicate their pets or take care of their pets than to take care of themselves, right? So that's a valid question, right? Open question. It needs an explanation. And instead of trying to do something like, using psychology, which is what he does actually, which possible ideas come to your mind to answer this question? People tend to think...
I think there are already people who have addressed this thing in cognitive neuroscience and psychology related examples.
Or there are common sense answers, like people tend to consider themselves exceptional, so I have this disease, but I cannot be so bad, it's not, in my case, it's gonna be a little bit different. I just, I'm not gonna follow the advice. Or people are just lazy and negligent about their own care.
Sometimes it's the fear to conform that also plays a role. So sometimes you just don't accept it.
So, point is, there are all sorts of answers, right? I don't know what the answer is psychologically speaking, but you can speculate. Yeah. But what he does is so the first step that he takes is he assumes that there's like a corollary question. How much shame must exist for that to be true? Meaning for people to better take care of their pets than of themselves. So he's assuming already that the answer is going to be something like people that are ashamed of themselves. Yeah. And that's why they don't consider, they don't value themselves as much as they value their pets. Yeah. And that's why they don't take good care of themselves. I'd say, maybe there's some kind of Jungian Freud, archetype or something, running in their at the back of their heads, and maybe they are ashamed of themselves. Could be true. But instead of going that way, then it's when it starts to get crazy, because then he goes on a very long discourse about chaos and order. Yeah. And obviously, this when you're reading the chapter, you're wondering why this tangent. It's just there's no obvious connection, right? It's just people don't take their meds. Probably they're ashamed of themselves. Now let's go to chaos and order. Yeah. But you assume it's going to be important. There might be some
connection that he will bring
it must be important. Yeah. But then the dynamic of the guru is in full display, happening in real time when you're reading this, right? It's like, this is not obvious, but okay, I'm gonna take him by his word. I'm gonna let myself be guided by his island epistemology, sure. Right? Long discourse, and then he starts saying things like chaos. Chaos is unexplored territory, the foreigner, the stranger, the monster under the bed, the hidden anger of your mom, the despair when you're betrayed. Yeah. All sorts of, disparate things, or bad things,
which doesn't make sense to you.
You find no overlap. You know, there's no central concept other than bad things. Bad things happen. Chaos is bad.
Chaos is anything which is beyond the structure that you have defined.
And all of them are kind of by definition situations. Chaotic situations are not the situations that you would like to find yourself in, right? Are bad.
Yes.
And then he kind of slips it towards the end, and it's feminine, you know, and traditionally chaos is seen as a personality, and that personalities can only be understood with genders, and the gender of the chaotic personality happens to be feminine. Anyway, it's just like a slippage there.
Mm-hmm. So I don't get it.
No, I also don't quite get it, but he's just like...
He's talking about the linguistic traditions that we have. Of course, in English, you don't have any gender associated, but maybe there's some god related with chaos, which is a woman.
No, this would take us some steps further in the kind of the logical connections that he's making, but there's kind of an answer to that question in his worldview. And then, okay, so that's chaos is all of this bad stuff, things that you would not like to find yourself in, situations and so on. And then order is kind of the opposite. Order is, for instance, and I'm quoting, from his book, order is the stability of your marriage. Explore territory, tribe, religion, home and country, the greatness of tradition, the Shire in the Lord of the Rings mythology. The Shire is it's order, and the underground of the dwarves, I guess, it's chaos.
Mm-hmm. It's a good example.
Yeah,
the Shire makes you feel comfortable when you see Lord of the Rings. It gives you the sense of home.
Order is when things behave as God intended.
Yeah,
and then
God intended. Yeah,
then chaos is the masculine.
No, order is the masculine.
Sorry. Yeah, order is the masculine. Yeah. And here's a curious thing. It's a little tangent that I'm not even going to say that Jordan Peterson is a sexist. It's not what I'm going to say. It's not. I don't even have to go there. But he has often asked this question in interviews. Why chaos is feminine and all these bad things are associated with the feminine. And all these good things, desirable situations are associated with masculine nature. And then he gets asked, isn't that basically sexist? And he says, but I didn't make the connection, like the straight connection between saying, because this is feminine by nature is bad or something like that. And what I'm always wondering is that his whole modus operandi, his whole operational methodology relies so heavily on making symbolic bridges between all sorts of ideas.
Yeah.
But this particular connection, you're not allowed to make.
Mm-hmm.
This one is not up. You can't.
It's not up.
You simply cannot. Yeah. You simply cannot make it. Again, the guru mechanics. He has to lead you. Otherwise.
Yeah.
You're lost. There's no way. There's no internal coherent logic.
There's
you cannot pursue these ideas on your own. So he's leading you. Anyway, so then she says that all this chaos and order are understood as personalities.
Yeah.
They are not understood as
So this is modern world symbolism.
Yeah, this is absolute symbolism, in a runaway process.
Yeah.
And then he says that chaos and order are experienced as personalities, and personalities have genders. And then he goes, again, as a kind of going back to this idea that chaos is male and order is feminine. And this dichotomy is also symbolized in the Judeo-Christian tradition, because you have the Virgin Mary, which is the female, and then you have the figure of Christ. So the Virgin Mary is very often portrayed with Christ, because it's the baby, right? She's the mother, she's the baby, and there's the sculpture of, I think it's Michelangelo, the Pietà, where both are they together. So there's like a kind of unity between the male and the female, chaos and order. And he also says that actually he's quoting somebody else there, so it's not something that is his idea, but he says that also the unity of chaos and order is somehow always echoed in kind of the insistence in the androgyny of Christ, something that I've never heard before. Anyway, so it's a symbolism there, symbolism all over the place. And then he connects that to the Genesis story, the expulsion of Adam and Eve from paradise, from Eden. And there he says that the paradise, God created Adam, created Eve, and put them in paradise. And then he told them, you can eat whatever, all the animals you find, and all the fruits that you find in this garden, except from this tree, the tree of science, good and evil, I think that's the name. And those apples you should never eat. So that's paradise. Paradise is order. So again, a symbolistic connection there. Paradise is order, but there's the snake. And the snake approaches Eve. And the snake is convincing Eve to, eat from that fruit that God told you not to. Yeah. It's going to be all right.
So it's Eve's fault.
No. So this is the snake's fault, first and foremost. The snake is chaos. So, it has to run through the same lines. Again,
symbolic.
You have to follow. You have to follow him, otherwise you will not get it.
Yeah.
And the snake is the chaos. And then he says the snake actually is traditionally understood as Satan and the spirit of evil. And then he goes on to connecting that to psychology, and he says that so snake symbolizes Satan. Satan is the spirit of evil. And if you put that into a psychological context, then the worst of all possible snakes is the eternal human proclivity for evil. Okay. Now he makes a connection between the biblical story and psychology, in one sweep. And then he says the worst of all possible snakes is psychological, spiritual, personal, internal. So now you're kind of grounding things from the Bible into the realm of psychology through the symbolism that connects chaos with order and the personalities and so on. And then he was really crazy. He talks about he makes a sidestep connection to evolutionary psychology. Yeah. And this is rather amazing to me.
And he has a really soft spot for evolutionary psychology, or at least connecting everything to it, which makes perfect sense, because I think that personally I feel that is the right way to go about figuring out a lot of the issues that we have to deal with. But yes, he stretches the limit here.
Oh, by far. He says, why should it be a snake, and why Eve not is a snake? And then he says, maybe it's because in our ancestral past, the mothers had to take care of their offsprings, and snakes were a real threat, so they had to be more, watchful.
Is he a believer
snakes.
Of the universe was created 6,000 years back?
No.
He doesn't.
No, not at all. Not at all. No, he a lot of his ideas come from evolutionary psychology.
Yeah.
So anyway, so makes that connection. That explains why the snake approached Eve rather than Adam. Because mothers had to be more watchful for snakes in the forest, in the jungle. And then she says, and then Eve becomes self-conscious, and immediately she starts nagging Adam, kind of. It's like immediately makes Adam self-conscious by shaming him into taking responsibility. And then if you connect this to the all this talk about chaos and all the bad things and how that's feminine, and it starts getting a very messy
but
picture.
Adam and Eve is also symbolic for him, or he's really thinking that at some point.
It's so hard to tell.
Yeah.
That's what you can't tell in the end. I think it is. I think it is. But and then he goes on.
He really, if you want to connect it to the evolutionary psychology, you have to assume, at some point when human beings were hunter-gatherers or foragers, women could see some things more clearly than others, and then so he's thinking on those lines when he's thinking evolutionary psychology, but then connecting it to a story which is 6,000 supposedly happened 6,000 years back,
which actually is fallacious. If you follow this line of thought, then that would, if it's the case that females had to kind of develop a more acute vision, let's say, because of evolutionary reasons, because they had their offsprings under their care, then the implication is that today females should have a much more acute vision than males. And I don't think there's any argument or evidence that that's the case.
In some cases, yes.
There's something about discerning colors that I
Yes.
think it's more common in females, but it's really a matter of
And women don't have do not have this issue with these red green. So there's a lot of
daltonism.
men who cannot distinguish between red.
Sure,
green.
and but there are other explanations.
And that
theories
issue
for that.
is Y chromosome linked, so it doesn't happen with.
Sure, but it's never going to be to the extent as positing that women are better at locating snakes that are moving in the forest.
Yeah.
And are significantly better. That it confers them an obvious advantage over men.
I'm not sure though.
I think it's
because I don't know, because of course looking at movement is something.
Fine. That's a debatable thing.
Yeah.
But you don't think that that's why the Bible was written in this way?
I think they knew their evolutionary psychology.
No, you're trolling me. And okay, let's say that was just pure trolling.
Yeah.
And then he goes on. He says that acute human vision might have in part evolved to detect snakes and fruits. And that's a possible theory. But then he's saying he's kind of grabbing things, facts. Let's say I will not call them facts. These are theories, evolutionary theories about the evolutionary history of humans, and kind of using them to cement his reading of the Bible, which is very disingenuous in general.
Yeah.
Because obviously people that wrote the Bible had no clue about any of these evolutionary conjectures. Now, fine. So there's this.
So Adam and Eve is not the Bible.
It's part of the Bible, absolutely. It's Genesis.
It's the Old Testament.
The Old Testament, yeah.
And that's also the Bible.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
The Bible it's comprised by both of them, Old and New. Anyway, so then there's that sidestep into evolutionary psychology, kind of to justify his interpretation, I would imagine. And then there's the fact that, after Eve eats the apple and shares it with Adam, they become self-conscious about their nakedness.
Yeah.
About many other things in general, but
specifically
about their nakedness, and they start to. Well, this is his interpretation. This is his words. They see flaws in their bodies, and there's like an objective tallying or comparison between some sort of objective standard of beauty and their particular situation, and because probably they see themselves faltering, they evaluate themselves as not quite reaching that perfect standard of beauty, they feel ashamed of their nakedness and they're ashamed of themselves. And then he kind of starts closing the circle. So why would you care about yourself if, internally you're flawed and you become aware of it, and this awareness comes. And it's really hard to explain because it really becomes very unclear if it comes from the Bible or the people that wrote the Bible had these ideas already in their minds and then kind of condense them into stories, and this is the message they want to get across, some weird thing, and then this nakedness and this self-awareness of our capacity, how we don't manage to meet the criteria first and foremost of physical beauty and so on, make us aware of morality and so on, and that's kind of the end message. Well, it's not the end message, but the way he answers the question of why we don't. You just have to see now. Detach yourself a little bit, see it from a bird's eye view, and see how these things started. Mm-hmm. Why won't people take their meds? Maybe because they are ashamed, and the Bible has this blah 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 story that explains why you should be ashamed of yourself, and the reason why you're not taking care of yourself is because you're subconsciously, internally ashamed of yourself. And then he says the chapter ends with a long speech of, that might be true, but you also have a spark of the divine because God made you in His image, and that immediately implies that you are also kind of a little bit like God, but with not all the potentialities developed and so on. So that you should take responsibility for that.
Postmodernists also in a sense.
You should take responsibility for that. If you want to make the world a better place, you need to start by taking care of yourself. Blah 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 blah.
So
is there a way?
So in principle, this is a self-help book with pseudo-profound bullshit.
I didn't even want to call it like that, but
Because
Again.
of course, if it's really helping people, it's about so this chapter in a sense is, without digging too deep into the middle part of it. At the end, he's talking about try to respect yourself, in essence, right?
Yeah.
And these are the kind of narratives that self-help books do in any ways. And 12 rules to life.
12 rules for life.
Yeah. So that is
So if you
typical sounding name for a self-help book.
It is a self-help book,
Yeah.
Through and through. If you want to judge it on pragmatic grounds, then I think the evaluation should be positive.
Yeah.
Now, where can that go wrong? It seems to me that there's a potentiality for that to go wrong, because, again, these are not ideas that you can pursue on your own. I'm not want to say this. He doesn't have a cult. He's not a guru per se.
But this is a beautiful example
of the guru mechanics,
which makes you understand. For instance, a lot of the leaders in the Islamic traditions. You see, they have so much flexibility where they interpret a narrative in whichever way they want. It's a similar exercise.
All I'm saying is that this is the stuff. This is whatever you learn from the Guru effect, plus this this quote explanation from Martha Nussbaum, translates so neatly into this. It's a perfect textbook example of what we discussed before, right? And I have issues with that, but they are not personal issues. These are issues about differences in worldviews, and differences in what's true and what's not, and how do you communicate what's true, and you don't have prior commitments when you try to reach the truth, because he always shapes everything to fit the biblical narrative or the Judeo-Christian narrative and try to validate.
But it's important to end well, right? End with something which sounds good. I think that's the essence of it, right? If it ended quite obscurely with his message, it probably this entire...
You're flawed, you do well not taking care of yourself. Fine, but there are dangers in this. And should we
go for it?
Wrap this up?
Yeah.
Well, it's a little bit longer than our normal episodes. I was afraid that this would happen.
But this is also I always tend to cut people in the middle of their sentences, but I just remembered Kant, for instance. He is an influential figure from the past who has interpreted a lot of things in empirical terms, right? But he was a biased human being who was conditioned by his own society. So, for instance, he tries to defend or come up with a very empirical argument on why masturbation is bad. Because that pertained to his worldview, right? That it is something that is bad. And then he fitted a narrative, which I'm assuming for a...
Do you know from where? I mean, what was like...
I don't remember at the moment, but at some point I was reading his dialogical process about it. It's... I won't go into it because I will probably misspeak some of the stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. But in principle, he wanted to come from first principles to explain something which is a very biased opinion. So that's in principle what gurus end up doing.
They are committed to a worldview.
Yes.
And they will make everything fit. Honest gurus.
Yeah.
Now, honest gurus, you know? Deceptive gurus are different.
But it could very well be that this guy, at some level, he's just...
I think he's honest.
Yeah.
You know, for fully honest assessment from my side, I think I've never taken him to be deceptive.
Yeah.
Actually, I think he's honest. I think he believes all of this. And I think he knows he's doing... I mean, you know, again, in utilitarian terms, he's doing possibly more good at this stage than bad. But I think, you know, Sam Harris had 4 conversations with this guy, and there was a point
that's my only objective where I have come across this guy.
And there's a point that Sam Harris keeps on insisting on, and I completely agree with that, which is we now are in possession of good reasons to follow all of this, to arrive to the same kind of advice.
Yeah.
You don't have to subscribe to this ancient text as if they are an infallible source of wisdom anymore. We can do that now, detaching ourselves from those ancient texts. So
that's an advice you can give to the Judeo-Christian people.
I try my best all the time.
But no, or people coming from the Islamic traditions, because there's a specific book which you can unabashedly criticize on your side. It's not possible to change a worldview, though. If you come from a certain worldview, if you come from the worldview that God is everywhere, as a first principle
statement,
as a first principle, and then you make logic of everything. It's very hard to go like to make people disagree with that statement if they're bought into it. So that's the tricky thing. That's in essence what we have tried to clarify here as well, right? When you're convinced with a certain worldview,
that you try to make everything conform to that.
And that's part of what
it's a commitment.
They say in this book also, right? Like if...
Paper.
In this paper, that when you are making these reflective judgments, the first judgment could be something like God is everywhere. And then after that,
that's a statement that you accept as true?
Yeah. Or something like your parents told you that God exists and God takes care of everything. So if that is a principle, unquestionable matter of truth, then you can come up with a very logical argument with anything. And when you have gurus who are trying to reason things out with that as a basic principle, like baseline of truth, then there's no way out.
Yeah, I think the issue is that gurus, again, intellectual gurus, are committed to a worldview, and they will always, if you want to make this, there's a parallel with Thomas Kuhn's interpretation of scientific revolutions. They will try to make everything conform to that worldview, and this is a perfect example of that.
So worldview is paradigm.
Worldview is a paradigm for guru style of communication, let's say.
And this is something we'll come across from time to time with whatever conversation we are going to have.
Yeah. To end this, I want to end this in a quote.
Yes.
And you need to guess who said this. As we face fear in these times, and fear is all around us, we also have anti-fear. It's hard to imagine or measure. The background radiation is simply too static to be able to be seen under the normal spectral analysis. Don't try to guess who exactly, but scientist, philosopher, religious personality.
I have no idea who you're talking about.
So he's a comedian.
Okay.
He's Reggie Watts. And he uses all this kind of communicative style to make his comedy. And it's absolutely indistinguishable from the way gurus communicate themselves. And I find that very interesting.
Oh, that's a good way to end.
Yeah.
Unless I end by saying that my personal guru is Deepak Chopra.
I thought we were going to end up in a positive note. You just screwed it now.
Okay then.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry. This took longer than not unexpected. I actually kind of expected it to be long, but yeah, it's an interesting topic, and I'm sorry, it's very dear to me. Went on, and I had to externalize my personal vendetta, as you call it. Okay,
cool.
Should we say goodbye?
Yeah, I think that's about time.
Okay.
Cheers.
See you next time.
Yeah.
If you like what we do, please help us continue doing it simply by subscribing to our YouTube channel, following us on Twitter, liking us on Facebook, visiting our website @TheBottom.com, or spreading the voice. All the links are provided in the description. Thank you for listening, and until the next time.